The predator snarled. Its massive maw opened wide, rows of jagged teeth glistening with fresh saliva under the sterile lights of the interspecies clinic. The snarl wasn't a threat, it was a warning. A low, guttural vibration followed, making the reinforced walls tremble slightly. The creature's eyes locked onto the alien vet standing just a few meters away. Vet technician Dulex froze. He was a Rixtari, a species known for their excellent memory and a tendency toward anxiety. His three eyes blinked asynchronously as he tried to interpret the predator's body language, but his trembling hands betrayed his fear. He inched backward, medical scanner clutched tight. "He's going to attack," Dulex whispered hoarsely. "That's an aggression display. He'll lunge any moment now." From the far end of the room, a human stepped forward. He didn't wear a protective suit or carry a plasma prod. Just a gray hoodie with a faded Earth Sports Team logo and a pair of worn cargo pants, stained with something that might have been blood or barbecue sauce. "Relax," the human said, eyes crinkling as he grinned. "He's just hungry." Dulex's middle eye twitched. "Hungry?" "Yeah." The human walked directly into the predator's line of sight. The beast, easily the size of a hover truck, shifted its massive weight forward, claws clattering against the tile floor. Its snarl deepened. "Steven," Dulex yelped. "You cannot approach it." The containment field Steven Ashford raised one hand, palm open, and gave a low whistle. The predator stopped moving. Its jaws closed slowly, and it let out a huff of breath that smelled like rotten meat and ozone. "There you go, buddy," Steven said. "Let's get you something to chew on before you start seeing everyone as a snack." Dulex stared, blinking all three eyes in stunned silence. Steven casually reached into his backpack and pulled out a vacuum-sealed slab of synthetic meat. He tossed it to the predator like someone feeding a neighborhood dog. The creature caught it midair with a loud chomp and began chewing contentedly. Dulex lowered his scanner. "That's not normal. That is not normal behavior for a Xarnak predator. They are not tame," Steven shrugged. "Nah, he's not tame, just trained and moody. He gets like this if he hasn't eaten in a while. You would too if you hadn't eaten since yesterday. That thing is capable of snapping a steel beam. He also likes belly rubs. But only from the left side." Dulex opened his mouth to protest again, but Steven had already walked around the predator and was scratching its flank, just behind the foreleg. The creature rumbled in satisfaction. The Rixtari technician backed toward the data console, antennae twitching nervously. "How did you even acquire a Xarnak predator? They're illegal on most trade routes. Found him injured on a mining moon 2 years ago, nursed him back. Name's Rufus." Dulex's voice cracked. "You named it Rufus." "Yeah." "Seems to like it." Steven pulled a folded piece of paper from his back pocket and handed it to Dulex. "Here's his vaccine record. I think he's due for a checkup." Dulex took the paper with 2 trembling hands. "You want me to examine it?" "Well, yeah." "You're the vet." "I specialize in small herbivores and aquatic vertebrates." Steven's brow furrowed. "You've got a scanner, don't you?" "I have a scanner, yes, but it's not calibrated for you'll be fine. Just don't make sudden moves near his tail." "He hates that." Rufus was now sprawled on the floor, tail thumping rhythmically, tongue lolling out the side of his mouth. He looked almost blissful. Dulex stared at him, then at Steven, then back at him. "I need a supervisor." Steven waved a hand. "Take your time." "Rufus isn't going anywhere." As Dulex scrambled out of the exam room, Steven sat down cross-legged beside Rufus and pulled out a plastic container of fried rice. The predator sniffed the air and nudged him with its snout. "No, this one's mine." "You had yours." Rufus gave a low whine and rolled over onto his side. Steven chuckled, then leaned back against the creature's warm flank like leaning into a breathing furnace and took a bite of his food. He'd been traveling the outer colonies for half a year now, ferrying rescue animals and dangerous pets alike. Rufus had been with him the whole time. And while Rufus definitely wasn't a dog, more like a prehistoric bear crossed with a thunderstorm, Steven treated him like one. It mostly worked. Dulex returned 10 minutes later with a supervisor in tow. The supervisor, a stern-looking Felyari named Lozuk, took one look at Rufus, then at Steven, and immediately said, "Absolutely not. That creature is not examined without full sedation." Steven didn't move. "That's not going to work." Last time someone tried to sedate him, he broke out of his cage and ate the stim gun. Lozuk's brow twitched. "You are joking." "Nope. Still passed the muzzle cam footage to the authorities." They didn't believe it either until he spit out the battery. Dulex clutched the vaccine record like it might protect him from being devoured. "He's here for a checkup. Just a checkup." Lozuk crossed his arms. "I will need to contact Central before any non-standard creatures are admitted." "Until then, that thing stays in the containment bay," Steven sighed. "Look, he's overdue for a checkup. He's been limping on his right hind leg, probably a muscle strain or bone bruise. I need someone to scan him. I'll keep him calm." Lozuk glanced at the predator, then at Steven. "If he attacks, it's your responsibility." "Fair." The vet techs took another 5 minutes to set up a reinforced scanning platform. Rufus lumbered onto it obediently, though he growled when Lozuk came too close. Steven stood beside the creature, one hand on its neck, murmuring softly. The scan began. Dulex worked the controls, his fingers still jittery. The screen lit up with internal imagery muscle groups, bones, organs. Steven leaned in. "There, that shadow near the femur, that normal," Dulex squinted. "That appears to be a partial fracture, possibly hairline." "Not full breakage," Steven's face tightened. "He's been favoring that leg for 3 days. What's the treatment? Rest. Mild pain suppressants, no running or jumping." Steven raised an eyebrow. "Try telling him that." Lozuk interjected. "We can issue a temporary brace, but it will require fitting, and we will not do it while he is conscious." Steven crossed his arms. "You want to knock him out? It is procedure. He'll panic. He doesn't like losing control. Last time someone gassed him, he tore through a wall." Lozuk stiffened. "Then we cannot proceed." Steven looked at Rufus, then back at the 2 aliens. "I'll hold him still." Dulex dropped his stylus. "You'll what?" Steven stepped onto the platform, placed one knee on Rufus's shoulder and leaned his weight into him. "Fit the brace, I've got him." "You are insane," Dulex muttered. "Maybe, but he trusts me." The fitting took 20 minutes. Rufus growled once, but Steven whispered something calming and the predator went quiet again. When it was done, the brace was secured and Rufus stood, testing his leg. He seemed unsure at first, then gave a pleased grunt and licked Steven's face. Dulex flinched. Lozuk stared. "You are either the luckiest human alive or the most reckless." Steven wiped his cheek. "I prefer experienced." As they left the clinic, Rufus limping only slightly, Dulex turned to Lozuk. "How did he survive raising that thing?" Lozuk's expression was unreadable. "I do not know. But I am never forgetting that snarl, or how the human laughed at it." Out in the hallway, Steven tossed Rufus another meat slab. "Let's find somewhere quiet to rest. You've got a limp, and I'm pretty sure I pulled something holding you down." Rufus nudged his arm gently. Steven winced. "Yeah, okay, maybe we'll both visit a clinic next time." They made their way toward the docking bay, leaving behind a trail of awe, confusion, and just a little fear. The clinic's auxiliary recovery chamber wasn't built for creatures exceeding 2 metric tons, but Rufus had claimed the thermal pad in the corner anyway, curling his bulk around it like a heat-seeking boulder. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and a species of moss used in Rixtari wound dressings. It was a clean smell, but dry, sterile. Rufus didn't like it. He kept huffing through his nostrils, as though trying to expel the air itself. Steven sat on a low bench near the exit, elbow propped on one knee, wrist rotating slowly. A dull ache had settled there, radiating toward his shoulder. He rubbed at it absently, watching Rufus shift, then pause, then shift again. The brace was holding up, but the creature's patience was fraying. A small, cube-shaped cleaning droid glided in and froze mid-beep when it registered Rufus's heat signature. It reversed with a mechanical whine and zipped back into its wall alcove, abandoning its mop module entirely. Steven couldn't help but grin, just a little. "That's the third one today." You're scaring the janitorial team, big guy. Rufus let out a long, bored groan and thudded his tail once. The bench bounced slightly. The door hissed open behind Steven. A new figure entered tall, cloaked in indigo fabric that shimmered subtly with embedded circuitry. Its head was elongated, with a central ivory ridge splitting its face vertically. 4 glossy black eyes blinked in alternating pairs. It carried a diagnostic array mounted on a hovering disc. "You are the human with the unregistered Xarnak," the being said, its voice low and filtered through a hidden translator node. Steven stretched his neck. "Name's Steven, and he's registered. Somewhere, gotta be. I filed something at the outpost near Tau Draconis. You are required to submit documentation to Central Registry before transportation between systems," it replied. "What you filed was a local containment waiver." Steven exhaled through his nose. "That explains the cold glares in the docking bay. I am Xarnak, senior physiologist for multispecies trauma." It gestured at Rufus. "Your beast is exhibiting signs of minor displacement stress. We must recalibrate his neural interface profile before he destabilizes." Steven frowned. "He doesn't have an interface." Xarnak's expression didn't change. "Then he is destabilizing already." Rufus rolled onto his side, groaning again. Steven stood and approached as Xarnak activated the diagnostic disc. It floated forward cautiously, emitting a soft chime. Rufus tracked it with one eye but didn't move. "He's been restless all morning," Steven said. "Didn't touch his protein cubes, that's not like him." Xarnak adjusted a dial on the disc. "His limb is healing, but his metabolic rhythm is misaligned with this habitat's solar cycle. He requires a dusk simulation environment and a humidity increase of 23%. Steven reached down and scratched the coarse fur behind Rufus's ear. "I can rig something in the cargo hold. We've got a spare humidifier and a few light filters." "He's used to weird atmospheres. You are not a specialist." "No, but I read fast." Xarnak tilted its head. "This is not an admirable trait, it is a reckless one." Steven stood upright. "I didn't say it was admirable. Just useful." Xarnak pressed 2 fingers to its own temple, accessing something unseen. "We will authorize temporary environmental adjustments, but your companion must remain under observation for 48 cycles. If he exhibits any aggression toward staff, we will sedate him fully." Steven nodded. "Understood, just make sure no one tries to pet him without asking." Xarnak's eyes narrowed. "Why would anyone attempt that? They always do." One cargo handler tried. "Lost a sleeve." It turned and floated out without another word. The door sealed behind it with a soft hiss. Steven knelt beside Rufus. "You're really milking this, huh?" The creature's tail gave a single, lazy swish. Later that day, after the environmental changes kicked in, the room felt noticeably thicker, like standing beside a waterfall, even though there wasn't any sound. Steven had stripped down to a tank top, sweat beading at his brow. Rufus, however, looked content for the first time since they arrived. His breathing was slower, his eyes half closed. A faint chime rang from the wall console. "Incoming request." Steven tapped the screen. A new face appeared, smaller than the others, with translucent skin and large, watery eyes. It blinked slowly, then spoke in a voice that sounded like wind through reeds. "I am Thurn, apprentice xenonutritionist. I was told you refused the clinic's protein offerings." Steven wiped his forehead. "He won't touch anything that smells like synth spawn." "Got anything with bone marrow or natural fat content?" Thurn blinked again. "Those compounds are restricted to carnivore-class patients with verified dietary clearances. Check his dental scan. That jaw's not built for tofu." There was a pause. "I will prepare a sample from our archivist's meat vault. It will be ready in 1 hour. Appreciated." The screen went dark. Steven turned back to Rufus, who had rolled over again, this time with his back pressed against the heat panel. The brace was holding, but Steven could see the tension in the creature's shoulders. 1 hour later, a delivery drone arrived with a sealed container. The scent hit almost immediately, rich, iron-heavy, real. Steven cracked the lid and held it out. Rufus sniffed once, then lunged forward and devoured it in 2 bites. Steven watched carefully. "You chew with your molars now, that's new." Rufus licked his lips and exhaled. The door opened again, this time more cautiously. Dulek stepped in, holding a small data pad. He looked considerably less pale than before. "I was told to monitor your companion's feeding behavior." Steven gestured at the empty container. "You just missed dinner theater." Dulek approached hesitantly and tapped a few readings into the pad. His cortisol levels have dropped. "That is promising." Steven leaned back against the wall. "He's still twitchy. If you've got anything that helps with muscle tension without knocking him out, I'm open to suggestions." Dulek nodded slowly. "There is a topical salve derived from Yeltree root. It works through dermal absorption." "I will retrieve it." As he turned to leave, Steven called after him. "Hey, thanks, I know this isn't exactly your specialty." Dulek glanced back. "No, it is not. But I am beginning to understand why you were not eaten." Steven chuckled. Rufus burped. By the following evening, the brace had been adjusted twice. The humidity increased again, and 3 different staff members had stopped by just to stare at the creature and then leave without saying anything. Steven had started keeping count. Rufus had begun showing signs of boredom, the kind that led to floor scratching and low, rhythmic growls that made the air vibrate. Steven knew those sounds. If they didn't leave soon, Rufus would start breaking things just to hear them snap. Xarnak returned during the 2nd sleep cycle, along with Thurn. The 2 aliens stood just inside the threshold while Steven was mid-stretch on the floor, trying to unknot his shoulder. "Your companion's behavior suggests he requires environmental variation," Xarnak said. "Translation?" Steven asked, not bothering to stand. "He is overstimulated by confinement. He must move." Steven winced as his back popped. "I've been saying that. He needs space." Thurn stepped forward. "There is a controlled exercise dome on level 3. It is used for rehabilitation of larger fauna. We can arrange access." Steven stood. "What kind of fauna?" Rathari sand oxen, slightly smaller than your companion. "Perfect." Rufus was already rising, his ears twitching. He sensed a change coming. Xarnak extended a hand toward the door. "Follow us, but do not deviate from the corridor. Security systems are automated at this hour." As they moved through the dim halls, Rufus's claws clicked softly against the floor. Thurn whispered something to Xarnak, who replied with a low hum. Steven caught only fragments, words like neurological compensation and behavioral imprinting. He didn't interrupt. They reached the dome. It was massive, a full hemispherical chamber with terrain simulators embedded in the floor and wall projectors casting a desert vista overhead. The air shifted the moment they entered. Warmer, drier, realistic. Rufus stepped in slowly, then broke into a slow trot, then a gallop. He ran in wide arcs, tail sweeping behind, claws carving shallow grooves into the imitation sand. Steven leaned against the railing, arms crossed. Thurn stood beside him. "He is faster than I predicted." Steven nodded. "He gets sluggish in low-gravity zones, but here, this is his rhythm." Xarnak remained silent, observing. After several minutes, Rufus slowed, then stopped entirely. He dropped into the sand and rolled once, kicking up a plume of dust. Steven exhaled slowly. "Thank you," he said. Xarnak turned its head. "This does not mean we approve of your methods." "I don't need approval. Just options." Rufus let out a long, satisfied yawn and for the first time in days, didn't growl afterward. At mid-cycle, just before the artificial sun dimmed in the dome, Steven crouched beside a long, low bench made of thermopolymer and unpacked a small case. Inside were several vials, a set of analog syringes, gauze, and a bottle of triple antiseptic solution. Rufus was lying nearby with his head on his forepaws, eyes half-lidded but tracking every movement. His side rose and fell in a steady rhythm that had taken most of the day to re-establish. Steven glanced over his shoulder. "You're not gonna sulk if this stings a little, right?" Rufus didn't move. "That's what I thought." He lifted the first vial, checked the label, and drew out exactly 3 milliliters. The compound was a broad-spectrum anti-inflammatory, modified for high-mass organisms. Not the kind of thing you could find in a standard shipboard medkit. He'd bartered for it using a crate of century-old Terran whiskey at a frontier port. The deal had been quiet and a little desperate. He stood and walked over to Rufus, who shifted slightly, exposing the joint near the brace. The swelling had gone down, but there was still a tightness in the surrounding tissue. Steven knelt and pressed his fingers gently along the muscle. Still tender, he muttered. Okay. Small dose, right over the insertion point. Before the needle touched fur, the door to the dome hissed open. Dulux entered, this time alone, carrying a thin tablet and a portable scanner. His antennae drooped in the ambient heat, but he made no move to leave. You should not administer injections without oversight, Dulux said. There are liability implications. Steven didn't look up. I've logged every dose and lot number. You can verify it. I can, but that is not the point. Then what is? Dulux hesitated. You are not licensed for xenobiological medication. I'm also not licensed to rewire a cryostasis unit, but I've done that too. You learn fast when the alternative is death by vacuum. He pushed the needle in with a steady hand. Rufus didn't flinch. Dulux approached slowly, tapping the tablet. His systemic response has stabilized. Cortisol is holding. No adverse spikes. Still, most species need sedation for injections. Steven stood, capping the syringe. He doesn't, because I never gave him a reason not to trust me. That is not a methodology, it is improvisation. Welcome to humanity's core competency. Dulux gave a long, flat stare. You really believe trust is enough? Trust gets you close enough to help. That's where you start. The Rixtari technician glanced at Rufus, then lowered his voice. I reviewed his scans again. That fracture didn't come from a fall or strain, it came from impact. Blunt force, repetitive possibly. Steven's jaw tightened. Yeah, I know. Dulux didn't look away. Was it during transport? No, before I found him, there was a pause heavier than the ambient pressure. I pulled him out of a fighting pit on Kandara Roman 4. Some local syndicate was running unregistered blood matches with off-world predators. He was half dead when I got there. No one expected him to last an hour in recovery. Dulux's fingers stopped tapping. Why did you take him? Because he looked at me like he hadn't given up yet. Steven began repacking the case slower than before. Dulux sat on the edge of the bench, careful to keep his legs tucked. He should not be alive. Even with your methods, even with the best medicine, his kind doesn't typically survive captivity. Steven nodded. I know that too. They sat in silence while Rufus shifted his weight and stretched out one hind leg. The brace clicked softly. The overhead lights dimmed slightly, signaling the coming rest cycle. A soft, simulated breeze drifted through the dome, stirring the dust. The environment had been calibrated to cycle through a 26-hour day, mimicking a consistent planetary rhythm. Rufus had adjusted faster than expected. Dulux cleared his throat. There's a small abrasion forming under the support band, not infected, but it will be if it's not cleaned. I'll take care of it. You should not have to. We have dermal technicians. He won't let them close. Dulux stood. Then show me. If I'm to be involved in his care, I need to learn how to approach him. Steven paused. You serious? Yes, I may not agree with your methods, but I acknowledge results. Steven pulled out a fresh gauze pad and a small bottle of saline. All right, move slow, don't stand directly in front of him. Come in from the left. Dulux followed his lead, his motion stiff but deliberate. As they approached, Rufus lifted his head and made a low, questioning sound. It's all right, Steven murmured. He's with me. Rufus didn't move as Dulux crouched beside Steven. The Rixtari extended one hand, palm down, and let it hover a few centimeters above the creature's flank. He's warmer than I expected. He runs hot, fast metabolism, helps with healing. Steven peeled back the edge of the brace. The skin underneath was irritated but not broken. He dabbed the area with the saline, then handed Dulux the gauze. Go ahead. Just dab, don't rub. Dulux complied, hands steady despite the massive ribcage rising and falling just beside him. Rufus gave a low exhale but didn't stir. When they finished, Steven secured the brace again and stood. Dulux remained crouched for a moment longer, then rose and brushed dust from his uniform. "I think I understand now," he said quietly. "Understand what?" "Why he listens to you." Steven tilted his head. "It's not about dominance. No. It's about presence." Dulux turned and walked toward the exit. "Will you be back tomorrow?" Steven asked. The Riksari paused at the threshold. "I already requested reassignment to his case. No one else wanted it." Steven's mouth twitched. "Thanks." The door shut behind Dulux with a soft hiss. Rufus rose and padded over to where Steven stood. The creature bumped his shoulder gently against the human's arm, then lowered himself to the floor again, this time directly beside him. Steven sat down, leaned back, and stared up at the dome ceiling. The projection had shifted to a starlit night, the kind he hadn't seen since leaving Earth. Quiet, expansive, impossibly still, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, folded photograph. It was worn, the edges curled. A woman with dark hair and a half-smile looked out from it, holding a coffee mug in one hand. Behind her, a window showed a mountain range he hadn't seen in years. He set the photo down beside him and rested his head on Rufus's shoulder. "Guess we're not so different, you and me," he said. "Both got dragged into something ugly. Both came out the other side." Rufus didn't respond, but he didn't move away either. A few hours later, under the dome's artificial dawn, a technician arrived to collect environmental readings. She entered without announcement, paused when she saw the human asleep against the massive predator, and backed out without a word. By the time the dome lights reached full brightness, Steven had already woken, stretched, and cleaned the brace again. Rufus was alert but calm. Dulux returned mid-morning with a fresh diagnostic unit and a new pair of gloves. They worked in silence for nearly half an hour, checking muscle recovery and joint alignment. When the last reading blinked green, Dulux sat back. "He's cleared for release." Steven blinked. "That soon? He's out of danger. The rest is just conditioning. That's best done outside a clinic." Steven looked at Rufus, then at Dulux. "You sure?" "Yes, but there are conditions." Steven raised an eyebrow. "You must report to a registered vet center every 30 days. You must file a transport plan with Central, and you must never again attempt unauthorized medical intervention on clinic grounds." Steven saluted with 2 fingers. "Noted." Dulux held out a small chip. "This contains his full treatment record, updated and verified." Steven took it and slid it into his wrist pad. "Appreciate it." Dulux hesitated. "You were right, you know." "About what?" "Trust is where you start, but it's not where you stop." Steven nodded. "No. It's not." They left the dome together, Rufus walking slowly beside them, his gait steady. The clinic staff gave them a wide berth, but no one called security this time. As they reached the docking bay, Dulux turned to face Steven one last time. "You are not a vet." "Nope. But you are something else, something useful." Steven grinned. "I'll take that." They boarded the ship. Rufus settled into his usual spot near the engine bulkhead, the hum of the reactor already lulling him. As the airlock sealed and the engines warmed, Steven leaned back in the pilot's seat and looked at the stars beyond. "Next stop, somewhere less fluorescent," he said aloud. Rufus gave a soft grunt of agreement. And for the first time in weeks, Steven didn't feel like he was running from something. He was just going.